This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hello and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Today, Kathryn and I are excited to welcome Mike Stop Continues back to the roundtable. Mike is an author who lives on 2 continents and writes in 2 genres, urban fantasy and literary fiction. You can find him at MikeStopContinues.com. That is MikeStopContinues.com, all one word. And coming up soon, he's releasing the prequel to his Graffiti Magic series. So welcome back, Mike.
Thanks. Glad to be here again. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we are excited. And so today we're going to talk about theme, but specifically thinking about theme in your pre-writing process as you start the outlining or storyboarding, as you're doing your developmental pre-writing work. And the reason this topic came up is because I know Mike does that. And I thought, yes, let's bring that to the podcast. So Kathryn, do you think about theme before you write in those early stages?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tend to think about theme almost as part of my inspiration, because it's usually something that I want to talk about, and then along with a character that wants to talk about it, that spurs a lot of my plot development.
It's actually what it's like for me too. I find that but for me, it's actually before I realize the theme that I want to talk about, I've got the character or like that nugget that's already talking about it, and then I'm like, oh, right, because I've been thinking about that thing, right?
Right.
Yeah. Do you think most writers do that? I don't think we're taught to think about theme.
I don't think so, especially like when I think about how I've seen it written about. So like Stephen King on writing, he doesn't think about theme until he's revising what he's pantsed, right?
Right.
And I think that's a terrible way to do things, especially if you really want to tell a good story every time, right? Because I feel like what makes a good story is a theme that's sort of in it the entire time that you're in it, you know? That's not just something that's tacked on afterwards.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a great statement and worth emphasizing, that theme needs to run through the entire story. And so therefore we must be thinking about it throughout the entire writing process. And it is interesting how many people treat theme like it's this add-on that you sort of discover while you write, or maybe afterwards when you're reading your first draft and go, oh, okay, that's what my story's about. And then sort of try to, backfill it in as you revise.
And it's really weird because when you think about the books, like whoever you are, whatever your favorite books are, when you think about those books, they are your favorites because they moved you, because they had such a strong theme. Like you don't think about Silence of the Lambs the same way that you think about, other thrillers, right? You don't think about, let's say like Harry Potter the same way that you think about other young adult or other middle grade fantasy. It's just, there's something in those stories that speaks to you, that I think that's theme anyway.
Right. Oh, definitely. Yeah. And we've talked about Harry Potter in past theme episodes and how the search for family is the theme. The orphan boy discovering his family, growing into the role of patriarch or father figure. That is the thematic content of the story that drives everything, and it drives Harry's being, for 7 books, for the entire series arc. Yeah. So how do you come up with your theme in the early stages? Are you thinking, here's an issue, a thematic topic I want to work with, and then find a story? Or do you start with your character or some plot point and then discover the theme, but in that pre-writing stage? How does it work for you?
For me, I typically I'll start with the story. Some spark of the story will be there, and basically as soon as I have a sense of what the ending of the story is, then I know what my theme is, or at least what the first iteration of my theme is, because I don't always keep the very first version of the theme, because sometimes when you're you know, thinking about a particular issue, it's not universal enough, or it's not universal, or it's not useful enough to be a good theme, right? So like,
Right.
pretty much, if a topic is too timely, then it shouldn't be your theme. Then you
Yeah.
need to think about the thing that's more universal about it, that's more timeless about it, because otherwise you end up just writing propaganda, and
Yeah.
propaganda is not art, right? So like,
Right.
so typically in that first part, I do think about like, you know, am I just too obsessed about this thing? And if so, what's the more positive version, or what's the more timeless version, or what's the version that, like, if a person were to actually believe what I'm saying in the story, would it make their life better, right? Like, would they like go out into the world and have a good life? And I feel like that's the danger of when you just, you know, on the propaganda side, if you're using themes just to, like, you know, to say something about modern day politics, for instance, you're not actually, you're losing what's exciting or what's meaningful about it. You're losing the thing that's going to make people want to read it next year, or
Right.
a decade from now, or 100 years from now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if we look at the classics of literature, we're going to find that they all contain that universal, timeless theme, which has to be something about what it means to be human, about our humanity, right?
Yeah.
Deep at the emotional core of a story. We're always dealing with humanity, even if the characters aren't human. You know, what does it mean to be living and in relationship and, you know, part of this universe? Is there anything either of you would add to that sort of list of what makes a good theme? Timeless, universal? Will someone take this idea and then lead a better life because of it? Anything else? Those are pretty heavy-hitting qualifications for themes, so I think it's okay. I just wanted to open it up if if there were other ideas too.
Yeah, I think it's all, for me, it's a lot about the development of the character arc. So I think if it's helping you to think about who you are and how you need to develop as a person, again, that universal, you know, application to the reader. So you can't be too specific to the character. You can't be too specific to the plot. It needs to be an overarching idea. So, yeah, agreed.
Yeah, and I'm glad you added that character arc piece of it and the development. It's that journey of the protagonist through the story where we really get to mine the topic of theme and bring that forward. Theme is almost always perhaps, if we dare to be absolute on this, a part of our character's arc, not our plot arc. So we see that theme manifest through events of the plot arc, through relationships, things that happen in the plot, of course, but really it's about that character development.
Right.
Yeah, so when you're writing, pre-writing, and you're thinking about your plot arc and your character's arc, how do you factor theme into that? What is kind of the mental process that you go through in that pre-writing stage?
For me, I tend to, by the, you know, like in that, when you're first doing the brainstorming part, you have a lot of ideas that are not, most of them aren't going to ultimately make it into the book. But essentially what I do is, once I have my theme, I use it to just get rid of everything that isn't the theme. And then I start to rebuild from there. So like starting with the protagonist is like, what, you know, like, how do I shape this protagonist that he or she is like furthest from learning the theme, if it's the kind of protagonist that learns the theme, right? Because it could be it could be a story where the protagonist doesn't and only the reader does, or you know, but essentially it's like, first shape the protagonist, and then, you know, like then think about the A plot story, and like what kinds of hurdles will truly challenge the hero's ability to absorb this theme, and like what are the like really good arguments against the theme, like in real life, like what are the things that make it so that people, you know, like let's see, the ends never justify the means, right? So like, if that's your theme, you need to give a lot of situations. You need to offer the case where the ends do justify the means, and you need to do it over and over and over again in the strongest way possible to really make like that debate that's going on throughout the novel something that hits home, because it's hard not to believe that the ends justify the means. But sometimes, but if you really, I don't know, well, I guess if you do believe it, then you need to show that, like, even in the worst cases, even in the cases where you think that, sorry, I chose something that's sort of double negative now, so it's sort of really good. So, but let's take another theme, right?
Well, or let's put it in a specific example. Like, what if the end is, saving your child, but the means involves a journey of a lot of criminal activity, maybe even killing, maybe, so can you justify, say, killing even innocent people as fallout if the end is that you save your own child, who's dear to you, but what about the people you kill along the way? Like, if we make it concrete, does that help?
There's a perfect example.
Okay.
But yeah, and I mean, and that's a perfect example of a case where, like, for instance, in Breaking Bad, where he believes that the ends justify the means, and as at least a viewer, you come to the realization that no, they don't. That you can't become a meth chemist to like save your family from debt, right? Like, it just doesn't. Those things don't add up. Whereas the character doesn't learn that lesson. So, like, it's a good way to show that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't always have to be wrapped up in your protagonist learning the same lesson as your reader, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so now, how do you choose your theme? Does your theme come out of developing your character, or do you decide your theme and then develop your character while thinking about that theme?
I always redevelop my character and plot and ideas with theme, but I never start with a theme.
Okay, good.
Every time I've tried to start with one, I've ended up going the propaganda route. So I've learned to just say,
yeah.
It's like writer beware. If you start trying to preach at someone, your character is not going to be a very good character.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Starting with theme is really starting with the mission, with the message that you're trying to get across, and you end up with, as you say, propaganda, sort of shoehorning that message into every moment of your story and browbeating the reader. So, yeah.
I do think, though, there's another, like, benefit to not starting with theme, even if you're the kind of person who has the, detachment that could do it, is that when you find the theme while you're brainstorming, or, you find something that's deeper in you, I think, right? Something that, you often find things that, like, themes that, like, you didn't realize were so important, or so primal to you, And I think that makes them more exciting to write about too. Especially, depending on how willing you are to put yourself in your books, I guess. But I feel like every author gets over that very quickly, right? And
right. Yeah, it goes with the job. Do you find you write about the same theme over and over? Like, because we're talking about theme being personal, and we sort of have a passion or deep connection to that idea or that topic, like, say, independence, might be a theme that I work with a lot. So are you always kind of finding that same theme recurring, or do you consciously make an effort to vary it and, maybe pick a theme for a story?
Both, actually, yeah. I do find, I try to, in terms of, I think that goes along with style, in a sense that, I feel like style is like sort of a calcification process, right? Where, like, it's great to have a strong style, but you don't want to get stuck in one. Because if you get stuck in one, you sort of lose the ability to innovate. And I don't push too far away from the themes that like whatever the previous theme was, I don't push too far from it in the next one, but I do make sure that I'm not doing the same thing over again. So I try to look for new ground in all senses. But on the other hand, I do find it difficult writing in a series to do that as well. And it's actually something that's been making me question if I want to keep writing series, because I feel like it's more difficult to do, exciting new things when you're sort of like working with one character's struggle,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting. And when you do write a series, do you find it works best to have sort of one overarching theme for the series arc, or do you try to find different themes or variations on a theme for each book in that series?
Yeah, I try to do both, right? Each book has something going on in it that's unique, and then there's this sort of overarching one that sort of ties it all together. But I think that in the two series that I've done it much more successfully in one than the other. So I feel like Graffiti Magic is more about the one story, whereas David Spark is more about the individual stories. So it's it's tough. I wish that there was more leeway in writing series, I guess.
Well, I think, I mean, I understand what you're saying, and I agree with that. Like, you want to be able to write different themes in your stories, but I also think that, like, if there's something that you deeply want to explore, there are so many stories that you can tell that are individual and unique within the same theme subset. So even if you're writing about, quote, the same theme, end quote, like, you could have so many varieties of characters and stories and situations. So I think it's great to have different forms of inspiration, but if you're continually finding yourself as a writer returning to the same theme, like, maybe that just means you're not done with it yet, right?
Right.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you return to the same theme, Kathryn, in your writing?
Yes and no. I'm finding there are different facets of a similar idea, I think. They're along the same kind of subset of theme. I think I tend to deal a lot with identity and what that means to individuals, within the story, like who they are as people and that deeper understanding of who you are. Not necessarily like, this is what I do, or this is, but like the deep down level of who you are as a human.
Right.
And again, human or not.
Yeah, human or not, it's
deal
about
with that identity kind of theme. So yeah, definitely something I tend to return to.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm definitely finding I return to the same ideas over and over and over. And it's really struggles to become independent, sort of find your footing in a world that isn't supporting you or isn't even giving you ways and means to be free and express yourself and be independent. And so having to struggle out of those circumstances to become who this character needs to be, Yeah.
And I think there are a lot of authors that do the same thing, like they fall in within a theme, because I think readers tend to find authors that they have theme, connections with. So like you'll find an author that you really connect to because of the deeper themes in their writing. And maybe, their themes eventually change. Maybe you don't like the other books that they've written, and you find, because I think it's like the style or voice, you kind of connect with that a little bit with the theme as well, I think.
So I want to kind of dig a little deeper in the how to find a theme if we're talking about knowing your theme in your pre-writing stage, and maybe you just have a go-to theme like identity or independence, but when you're looking at, okay, I've got this idea for a character or some kind of storyline, and now I need to know what my theme is or what variation of that favored theme is going to play out in this story. How does that factor into the outlining or storyboarding process, right? What does that look like?
A lot of journaling.
Journaling is my go-to practice. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I mean, even if you're not a journaler, I think brainstorming, we can say a lot of, the time. And like Mike said earlier, like you don't want to start necessarily with the actual theme. Like I'm not going to sit down and say, I'm going to write a story about identity today. But like maybe I have a flash of a character and a flash of a situation, and I can start like journaling and expanding. And I think a lot of times mine comes as I'm journaling through the character arc. and problems and like the emotional wounds and stuff to harken back to previous episodes.
Yes.
So like as I start digging deeper into that, then I start actually coming up with a theme. And yeah, maybe it's similar to something I've already written, but that'll give me the ideas then to interweave into my plot and my character arc.
Right, and the uniqueness is going to come out of that fitting together of the character, the plot, and the thematic content. And yeah, I'm also a journaler, but there's also mind mapping and even spreadsheets. We've had authors who sort of put things out, spreadsheet wise. What's your process like, Mike?
So funny enough, I also journal, especially for this part of the process. But I also ask these sort of like questions that point up, like what, like for instance, if I have a bit of plot, it's like, what does this say about the world, or what what does this character learn, or like what those sorts of questions that like that's the best way I could describe it is like point up, right? They just
and the universal questions,
exactly.
How does it affect the bigger and the broader and the get macro on yourself.
Yeah, that's a really great point, because I think when I start doing that, and I don't know that I've framed it that way before. That's a really great tool, Mike. But when I do that, one of the things I look at besides how does this affect the world I'm writing is how is it going to connect with the world I'm living in and therefore my readers, So how is it pointing to that human experience that hopefully will make the story timeless? So 50 years from now, someone is reading a story written in 2019 about events that happened in 1920, and they're like, wow.
Right, exactly.
But yeah, so I guess from there I tend to try to put it in other places, like the theme, right? So like so putting it in plot, and then putting it in like side characters, right? All of the B characters should have some opinion about the theme. So like what does what do each one of these people think, right? About like do they there could be like a what do you call it, like wise character who already knows the theme, or they could be characters who believe different versions of the theme, or who are agnostic to the debate surrounding the theme, or like and all of those things sort of help to like keep it to make sure that every scene sort of has like all of the talk is ultimately about what the story is about, rather than being about other stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I find that it's like easier to get to the heart of the matter when all of the characters have a vested interest in it.
I like that. I don't think I've thought quite that into individual subplots and characters like that, like categorizing them into the theme as well. That's good.
That is good.
You probably do it. Like what I've noticed is like when I find something that doesn't work in a story, it's because it doesn't match the theme. So like as an author, there's just sort of this intuitive thing where like the things that are working, quote unquote, are the things that are already to theme. So like it might just be a matter of like finding, new ways to vary it or something.
Yeah, wow. Power takeaways right there. I love that. Thinking about theme not just with your protagonist, but with the world at large, and then all of those supporting characters as well. And not just how does that supporting character play into my protagonist's thematic movements, but what is their vested interest in the same topics? When we're talking theme, we're really talking that intangible, emotional, powered content, those bigger questions of humanity, whether they're dealing with art's role in life or personal identity or whatever that happens to be. Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right that when something isn't working in a story, it's usually because it's not gelling with the theme. It's sort of beside the theme, beside the point.
Yeah, if you think about like pretty much every Shakespeare play I could think of has these mirrors for the main character, right? Or like the main characters, or like, I mean, every single one of the comedies has multiple romances going on. And all of those romances play off one another. And the same thing in in the tragedies where you have like, for instance, in Macbeth, you've got the Macbeths, and then you've got the former king and queen, right? So you have, well, what are the relationships between these two, and what do they believe, and how does that affect how they exist in this world? I'm trying to can't think of the names in Hamlet. The offstage characters are basically, like they're not Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, but the other one. They're sort of basically they're a foil for what's going on in Denmark, right? There's something rotten in Denmark, and there's something rotten just outside the walls that are, it's that sort of thing. At least to look to for inspiration.
So by that sort of thing, you mean how are the supporting characters reflecting the theme back for the main characters? Yeah, and so I think in story, whenever you have that mirroring, your choice is to either complement or to contrast, right? Yeah. And so as writers, we should see all the nuances of that, and then hopefully as readers, they're tuning into to that subtext, to those elements that aren't necessarily obvious to our protagonist, but are really fleshing out the story, creating meaning, basically the meaning beneath and beyond the events on the page.
I think that's a good way of thinking about your antagonist development too. Like if you already know the thematic structure that your protagonist is going, like, using that foil method, like how is my antagonist different than my protagonist, can be directly, like you can develop that directly from theme. Because we already know we have to develop the antagonist opposite, your protagonist in ways, but the theme can really help, like, to define that for yourself, like ideologically, how these two characters are different and reflect each other.
That's actually that's a really good point. It reminds me in Hamlet of so Claudius, the king killer, right? He there's something, basically murder taints him, and so he's and now Hamlet is responsible to murder him, right? And so Hamlet's constant struggle is he's trying to make it so that he doesn't accidentally become Claudius in having to kill Claudius. So he doesn't want to do it while he's praying. He doesn't want to. So he's got this thing where he recognizes that like he himself is going to become rotten on the inside for doing the same thing that Claudius did. And so you have these two characters that are, like how far is Hamlet willing to go, and how far is Claudius willing to go to keep Hamlet from killing him, even though he feels that same guilt for being so rotten. So the antagonist protagonist thing is a great touch.
It is. Gosh, I felt like I just had something to say about that, and then I started thinking about Hamlet and Claudius, and
It's actually just one more thing is doing like you build an outline based on theme, and then how do you write with it, right? And this was the question I was asking myself, because it's, obviously it's not enough to just to make it once. You have to then actually make the story with it. So I was thinking that that writing with theme, as the first draft, is kind of like meditating, where you have to keep this thing in mind the whole time, and you don't want it to ever leave your mind. And that's how you have to write. So you have to sort of as you write through every word, you sort of try to keep in mind what the theme is, and just sort of do your best to lean things towards theme whenever you can. And that I feel like is the way that you get it in there. And obviously it's not the end point, right? Because you have revisions, and you don't have to worry about getting it right the first time. But I think that's the key to it.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think even if you aren't as conscious of doing that or as diligent, if you know your theme, it's going to be playing in the back of your mind. So you're going to have that kind of subconscious support as you're writing. I was just today writing a scene in which, so my protagonist is an inmate at a school for the feeble-minded. It's the 1920s, and she needs to bust out of there. And she's got a friend who is a little more wild than her, and they find some men repairing a road on the school grounds. And so the friend is sort of leading this effort to flirt with the guys so that they can maybe hitch a ride away from the school. And I don't think I was thinking about theme as I wrote it. I was really thinking about these men, the road workers who I'm introducing, and what are they like, and, what is this flirtation going to look like without going too far. And, I really want my protagonist to get a ride with these guys because I want to set it up in this way that's safe, so she's not just like hitchhiking across the state and who knows what would happen to her. So I'm thinking about all that stuff. And just now, as we're talking about theme, I was like, okay, and how is my theme working into that? Well, here are these characters who are striving for their independence, but they're living in this world that doesn't support young women being independent. And so the more wild girl, the flirtatious one who's kind of leading this effort right now, she's using what she has, the tools she has, which are her feminine wiles, to put it a certain way. So just to illustrate kind of what we've been talking about with an example, and I wasn't thinking theme this morning, but there it is, still supporting the movement through the plot as I write. So yeah, that's cool, because now tomorrow I'm going to sit down and be like, okay, how's my theme working all this? All right, I think this is a fantastic topic, and we will definitely put links in the show notes to our other episodes about themes, so people can go have a little theme party. Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.